There are a lot of people in this world who believe that their ancestors are apes. Now we have Dr. Jerry Bergman here with us today to dispel that notion. Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I am your host, Doug Sharp, and I have Dr. Jerry Bergman here with us, who is the author of this book called Apes as Ancestors. And this is examining the claims about human evolution. And so, Jerry, I understand that you're one of a team who has written this book. And tell me a little bit about some of the other authors that are involved in it.
Well, Jeffrey Tompkins, is a geneticist. He used to head the genetics lab at Clemson University, and he has become disillusioned with evolution and now is on the other side. And he looks at the genetic factors that are involved, primarily the idea that we are 99% or 98%, they say, similar genetically to apes. And he's found doing the research that indeed that is not true. If you think about it, if we indeed are 99% identical, or 98%, those numbers are given, to apes, that means there is a greater difference between us and females than us and apes, because the difference between males and females is about 98% difference. So when you make that comparison, people realize how foolish the idea of this 98% is. So Tompkins, Peter Line is probably the main author. He is a neurologist, and he has examined the claims relative to apes as ancestors. I can mention that virtually all of the skeleton evidence they have to make claims that we indeed have apes ancestors is not most of the bones, but the skull. And so it takes someone with knowledge of the skull, the brain area, to make comparisons between us and our supposed evolutionary ancestors. And Daniel Biddle, he worked on a number of chapters as well with me. The book, I have to admit, it's not one of my best sellers, partially because when people open it up, they see literally thousands and thousands of references. It's extremely well referenced, and we are trying to show that the scientific literature makes it very, very clear that indeed there is no credible link between us and apes. And I could mention briefly how this is done. Basically what we did is we evaluated the claims each paleontologist made about his other friends who were paleontologists. Not always friends, by the way, I should add. There's a lot of enmity between some paleontologists. But basically, I have my theory of evolution. He has his theory of evolution. I prefer my theory, so I spend a lot of time showing his theory is wrong. He prefers his theory, so he spends a lot of time showing my theory is wrong. And that is what is going on among paleontologists. So as a result, we end up with a lot of paleontologists proving their colleagues' research is problematic, seriously problematic in many cases. And this was the basis of doing the book. Now, a lot of this is harder for people to follow, and I should mention that, and I realized that when we were editing for the book. So what we've done is we basically had each author do a 4 or 5 page summary of the findings. So one doesn't have to read every word of the book. You can read the summary and get a good idea of what is in the book. I could add, my chapters though are very easy to follow because I'm used to writing for lay audiences. But the other chapters, a little bit more difficult. On the other hand, by the way, I traded a copy of this book for 2 haircuts to my barber. And just kind of mocking her, a couple months later I said, "How have you come in my book?" Expecting her to say, "Well, gee, I haven't started yet." And what she said is, "Well, I'm on chapter 4. It's going fine." And I asked her, this is a high school graduate, smart lady, does a great job on hair. I wondered how in the world she could get through all this detailed knowledge. She said, "Well, I read a few pages a day, 3 pages maybe, and after a while, after a month, you amazingly can get through 2 or 3 chapters. So it can be read by lay people, but it does, I should admit, put off lay people.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work to go through a tome like this, but like you said, it's well worthwhile to that a work like this exists, to be able to go through every one of the claims of ape men fossils and to expose them for the fraud that they are.
Yeah.
Now, the thing of it is that it's not necessarily what I call fraud, but it's taking the evidence that is there and putting it through an evolutionary worldview.
The basic problem in this is that evolutionists really, really believe that we came from apes as ancestors. They really believe this, and therefore they tend to see the evidence in that light. And what you need to do is see the evidence without evolutionary glasses. You need to look clearly at the evidence and make conclusions. But it's hard for evolutionists to do this because this is the belief structure they have. This is how they see the world. And of course they simply can't accept the other idea. And there's only 2 ideas. One is we evolved through natural selection and mutations. The other is that God created us. And so many evolutionists simply cannot accept the idea that a creator created us. And therefore, if you think about it, the only other alternative is, of course, evolution. And therefore, it must be right because it's the only choice they have, aside from the creator choice, which, of course, they've rejected.
Now I have a question. You often hear the terms cavemen and ape men, or a Stone Age, or Ice Age, or you would have different fossils attributed to these particular ages. Now, how much of a reality is that?
Well, that's a good question because there were cavemen a long time ago. There are cavemen today. A caveman is simply one who lives in a cave. And the people who lived in Europe, especially during the mini ice age, many of them, they were smart and they moved into caves because it not only protected them, but it also was much warmer. In fact, if you've been in a cave, when I was younger, I used to like to go through caves. And many caves, it has a consistent temperature of about 65, 66, 67 degrees. So it's cool in the summer, warm in the winter. And so it really is smart back then when you had really ferocious winters, which really are much worse than we have today. In the so-called mini ice age in Europe, it was smart to go into caves. And so it didn't mean they were less intelligent. It means actually they were smart and realized that you're going to freeze in this structure we have on land, really, really cold, or we can go into a cave and be comfortable. And so they lived for a while in caves, at least until the ice age was over. And so therefore, they call them cavemen because that's where they lived at least part of the time. Now when the temperature changed, some probably moved out of caves, and many they moved into caves just to live during the difficult parts of winter, and then moved out to hunt or whatever. So it was a home, but it was a temporary home. And Stone Age, we're referring to people before the Iron Age. And that there's a problem with that because from the biblical records, we know very early in human history, people were able to use metal to make instruments, etc. So there really was no, quote, Stone Age, but there was an age, I guess, when certain tribes, certain peoples did not have the implements that we have today, did not have the use of iron. So therefore they relied upon stones.
And we have Stone Age people today, and some places like in Irian Jaya or in Papua New Guinea where the people live in an environment that's fairly primitive. Mm-hmm. And that's not reflective of their age or their place in history. They just simply have chosen to do that, and for one reason or another. And so you did deal with quite a number of different of the fossils that are in this book, and one of them is a fossil called Lucy. And we talked about, this is something that I think Donald Johanson in 1974 discovered in the far region of Africa. And he was able to, he was trying to show that this fossil showed that the apes had all walked upright. Now, what do you write in this book about Lucy?
Okay, that's a complex area. One thing I should mention about Lucy is that Lucy is a rock star in the paleontological world. She's one of the better, but certainly not the best fossil evidence we found. Usually we find a skull and maybe a thigh, a few bones. But with Lucy we found it's said to be about 40% complete. Actually it's less than that because 40% we're talking about bones which are not complete. So when you look at the weight of the bones, it's probably about 30 or less % complete. So from those bones we have been able to learn something about Lucy. One thing we need to know to prove evolution is, did she walk upright? And the evidence there is problematic because when they put her together, it wasn't quite clear. And of course, again, we're talking about bone fragments. And so we have to glue them together, and that means there's some interpretation involved when we glue them together. Well, as you have a video of, indeed, they didn't quite fit what they wanted, and so they took casts, and they took a grinder, I guess.
Yeah, a Dremel tool, yeah.
A Dremel tool, and then made it easier to put together. And some people think, as I do as well, that's a distortion. But of course they say, well, the bones are distorted because they're in the ground. Pressure caused them to be distorted, and bones, of course, can be distorted slowly under pressure.
And by the appearance, it looks ape-like, but if we do this little repair on it, well, we can see it's clearly human. That's basically what it is. Now let's roll that clip right here.
Okay.
Let's watch their TV program. This is from PBS Nova, where they talk about Lucy. And this is so important because this is still being used in public schools today to prove that she's one of our ape-like ancestors. So let's take a listen and see if we can't learn something from it.
We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't.
Oh, this is very important, very important. Remember, if you want to be famous, you got to find an ape-like ancestor. To be an ape-like ancestor, you have to find monkey bones that walk like a human. Did you hear what he just said? This is the guy that found Lucy, Don Johanson. What did he say? He said the knee looked human. Simple question here. Did they even find a knee for Lucy? Did they find a complete knee for Lucy? No, they didn't. So how do you know it looked human? Don't trust me, I'm a Christian. Let's read the non-Christian source here. And what do they say? The skeleton called Lucy does not have an intact knee. Then how do you know it looked human? Now, did you hear the other thing that he said? But the shape of her hip didn't. Now, that's huge, because in order to walk upright, you have to have hips curved like... There you go. So how were the hips of Lucy curved?
Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We got to break it down. Did you hear what he just said? Her bones were broken after she died, then fused together in later fossilization. Please forgive me. I'm not trying to be crude or crass. But when you die, are your bones fusing anymore? When you die, the decay process kicks in. That's just the way it works, and I'm not trying to be impolite or disrespectful. So she died, her bones broke, and they fused back together. And when they fused back together, they looked like a chimp. Okay, we got a big problem. How do you get from human hip to chimp hip? I'll let them tell you, because it's good stuff.
After Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, perhaps by animals browsing at the lakeshore.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
Man, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. So how did it happen? Here's how it happened. You've got a human hip, Lucy. She's taken a walk down by the lake. She dies. Her body lays there, the flesh rots off, and then a deer comes along and steps on her hips, crushing them, and then they fuse back together curved like a chimp. That's what he said. Excuse me, I told you this is the way my mind works. When's the last time you saw an animal die down by the lake and lay there till all the flesh rotted off and all the bones stayed there? What's going to happen when an animal dies down by the lake? Scavengers are going to come along and shred that thing and take it all over the place. They're not going to lay there. And a deer steps on the hips and cracks them, and then they fuse back like a chimp, and you think we got a problem. And we're ashamed to open our mouth. Oh, but, did you hear what he said, Carl? The bones fit together so well, they were in an anatomically impossible position. What's that mean? It's a lot of big words to say this. She had hips curved like a chimp, so she couldn't walk up like a human. Well, how about this? She had hips curved like a chimp because she was a chimp. Nothing anatomically impossible about that. Oh, but let's keep going. Let's keep going.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost.
The perfect fit was like what? A chimp. But that's an illusion, Carl. No. That's an illusion. You know what? Hope. We have hope. I'm going to date myself here. Forgive me. $6 million man. You guys remember him? All right, you old guys. Come on. Show me some love, you know. All right, thank you. Now, listen to this. They have hope. Listen to the $6 million man. My mind has been working like this forever. It's like, I got to bring this slip in. Listen to what they said about $6 million man, and it applies directly to Lucy. We can rebuild her. We have the technology. Are you ready? Are you ready to see what they did? The technology that they used to fix the chimp hips to human hips. You ready? Doesn't sound like it. Are you ready? All right. Before you see it, I want you to hear it. So please play along, okay? I'm only here for a day. Play along. Shut your eyes. I'll tell you when to open them. I want you to hear what they did before you see it. Listen to the technology that they used to fix the problem. Please, close your eyes. Here we go. I'll tell you when to open them. Here we go.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
We have the technology. It's called a Dremel. May I ask you a simple question? Could a Christian get away with that? Could we get away with taking, oh, we don't really like this, so we're going to cut it out, and yeah, God, I know what you wrote, but let me tell you what you meant. Could we get away with that? We do it every day. We do it every day. Every day of the week. God, I know you said you created in 6 days and rested one, but God, you didn't quite mean that, because science has proven the earth is millions of years old. So those days really aren't days. They're long periods of time where there's a gap in between Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:2. God, we know what you wrote, but let us tell you what you meant.
So as you can see, Lovejoy, the guy who is in this video, did doctor this copy of this pelvic bone, I think it was, and
pelvis, yeah.
And so he did show that by doing this, well, we can fit it together to make it look like a human pelvis. Well, There's another problem with this fossil, is that they were not able to find the feet or the hands to this, and so to claim that it walked upright based upon a pelvis, and also from another, didn't they find another bone but like a mile and a half away, and a few hundred feet deeper in the sediment?
Yeah, what they found is others, what they thought were Australopithecus and afarensis, and they assumed that that's the same species, and they took the feet and hands and then put those onto Lucy. So now that may well be accurate, but on the other hand, it's not proof. They don't know for sure that indeed these body parts came from another Australopithecus afarensis.
I don't think they found feet and hands.
Other examples.
It was like a foot bone of some sort, but it wasn't the feet or hands. The only example that we know of the feet and hands is Littlefoot in the Sturkfontein Caves. And that you and I visited in South Africa,
Right.
and we were able to see that the feet of Littlefoot was with opposable toes. And the opposable toes on the back feet showed that it was arboreal in nature. They would climb trees, and that's what they're made for. And so it sort of disqualifies it as being a ancestor of human.
Right, but on the other hand, they strongly believe that there has to be an ancestor, and this is as close as they've found to it, so therefore it must have had feet, because it must have been bipedal, because what they're looking for is a creature that is in between apes walking and humans walking, and that would be at least some good evidence to being bipedal, and that's what they're trying to prove. So they may not be accurate in this case, but their story is true, and so therefore they feel, well, let's just put it together and embellish it, and that'll help convince people that our story is valid. But of course, we look at that more objectively and say there's a problem in doing that. I can mention that it's important to realize that we have feet and hands, but apes have, in essence, 4 hands. And so they call them feet, but they are actually hands because they have the opposable thumbs. And this is really important for apes because they climb. If you've ever seen a chipmunk, for example, not a chipmunk,
Chimpanzee?
a chimpanzee, I'll get it. Chipmunk is out of my mind because we just saw one outside a few hours ago. But it's interesting when you watch them climb up trees, they just zip right up a tree like a squirrel.
Oh, yeah.
They're very talented. And humans, of course, you get some humans that are pretty good, but not nearly as good as these chimpanzees who have 4 feet, 4 hands, who can climb trees very effectively. So that's the main thing they were looking for. And when you compare the, quote, feet of all primates and humans, only humans have feet as we know it. They all have basically 4 hands.
Now, presumably they used the Laetoli footprints to prove their point that this fossil walked upright.
That's an interesting case because when they interviewed experts in this area, the illustration over and over is given that if you had a friend of yours, took his shoes off, walked on a beach and left footprints, they would be the same as the Laetoli footprints. And my problem with that is that, number one, they probably are real human footprints. And there really is no direct evidence, or really even any indirect evidence, that shows these are the footprints of the Australopithecus afarensis, which of course they label Lucy as being.
Apparently they radio dated those footprints as being millions of years old. I think that's what they based it upon, was that it had to have been old, but it would have belonged to the Lucy type of fossil.
Yeah. Well, they'd have to date, if they could, fossil date the area they're in, because of course there's no feet there.
Right.
All you have is the prints. So therefore,
well, they use potassium argon dating on it.
Right, but they have to use potassium argon dating of the volcanic ash that was there, and that's what they're walking in. So they can date the ash, but you can't say the ash was put down the same time the footprints were put down. So they have the leeway. They can say, well, these must have been those of Lucy or one of Lucy's relatives, which is problematic. Although some do admit that these are human footprints that are made by humans. In fact, some claims of the natives that live in that area said, no, these are the footprints of our people who walked in this area because, well, one reason they found was because our children like to walk into our footprints. And so we have footprints, and then the children would imitate these footprints, and that's evidently what they found in some of these footprints.
You have mentioned that there was a fellow who did research on Lucy, and he's from an evolutionary point of view, but he came to a conclusion that the evidence doesn't really hold up. Now, who was that person?
Right, that was Bernard Wood, a paleontology professor at George Washington University, and he's one of the world's leading paleontologists. And he basically did a study, extensive study of Lucy. He didn't say didn't count, but he said there's questions. He had serious questions. And he says, right now I cannot say Lucy is evidence of human evolution, and she is a missing link between apes and modern man. But he said in the future we'll know whether or not, we'll be able to determine whether or not Lucy fits the bill or not. But right now we can't say that. And so even though the journals and magazines and movies have said basically, this is our ancestor, Lucy proves evolution, so many positive statements are made, but here is a well-known paleontologist who basically made it very clear, we can't quite say this yet. And he added further that there's a whole major problem with the so-called progression. Progression is pictures of apes slowly changing into modern man. And that is the most popular picture trying to explain evolution. It's everywhere. You find cartoons, you find in magazines. Life had a picture, National Geographic and other magazines. But he said the evidence no longer supports that. What we now have only is evidence for a lot of different skeletons, different evidence, but we have no clear evidence of a progression from one to the other. We have a lot of examples. I think what we found basically is just a variety of creatures. So there's nothing lining up, but we have a really large variety of creatures which have human or ape or both characteristics. It's like the horse evolution. They used to show from a small horse, a little dinky horse, to the big horses. That's evolution. And that was the main evidence for evolution for about a century. Now we realize that again is not true. All we have is a lot of variety, a lot of different horses, and you can't line them up to prove evolution of horses today from small horses a long time ago. All you have is a great variety, which you have today, of horses. Right today we can find horses at the size of a German Shepherd and the size of almost an elephant. They're huge. There's some horses that are what, 7, 8 feet tall? Yeah. So there's a lot of variety today. There's been a lot of variety in history, and that's all we have. And you cannot claim these fossils prove evolution of horses today from small horses, nor can you prove evolution of mankind from some chimp ancestor a long time ago. The evidence is not there.
It's a little bit like going up to my silverware drawer and picking out some forks and spoons and sporks and things that go, and you can line up my silverware in a little evolutionary progression, but it doesn't prove that the forks evolved from spoons.
Yeah.
So if you read his book, The Apes as Ancestors, you will get a lot of information. Every claim has been touched in this book.
Yep.
And I would recommend that you take a look at it and get this book, because it'll enlighten you on this whole issue. We hope you enjoyed our time with Jerry Bergman. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.